Welcome to everyone that's joined us on this webinar. Today we've got Phil Jordan, who is the founder and director of Partale. He launched the business earlier this year in February. Some would say good timing or not, just prior to COVID. I think actually it's made him a fairly busy and in-demand person. So Phil has over 15 years experience helping organisations with their people and culture challenges. Most recently, he was head of HR at Challenger Financial Group, which is a large financial entity within Australia. And Partale is his business, which is an HR advisory business, which is really set up to either provide the HR functions for SME clients or complement an HR existing team with specific projects or initiatives that they need to run. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Phil, who is going to take us through strategic people planning, leading people in the current environment, which has presented a number of challenges for organisations. So we're excited to have Phil here presenting today. So Phil, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dom, for the very kind introduction. So thank you everyone for joining me today. I must say it's a little bit surreal doing a webinar for your first large session as a founder of an organisation. But these are the times that we live in at the moment. And what I thought I'd do today was I was thinking about the work that I've been doing with some of the clients that I'm working with and some of the challenges that they're having in their business. So what I thought I would do is just to do sort of 5 bite-sized areas for us to touch on, and you can see them on the screen right in front of you. But workforce planning, how we think about that more holistically, talent management from both those critical roles in your organisation through to people that are have high potential, organisational change, big thing right now. People making changes to work schedules, unfortunately in the current environment, making tough decisions about letting people go. But just a couple of things at a high level for you to think about when making those changes. And then leading. A lot of the literature out there right now is around remote workforces, is how do you as an individual work effectively from home. I'm trying to turn that on its head today and give those leaders out there some insights into some of the things that I've been thinking about and advising clients on in this space. And then finally, coming out of COVID, thinking about the well-being of our people and how we can take a more holistic approach to employee well-being. So there's a Q&A optionality today. Dom is kindly going to be collecting questions, and we'll have some time at the end of the webinar for me to try and help out with any specific answers or questions you may have. So we'll save all them to the end, but you can type away and submit them to Dom whilst I'm presenting. So jumping straight into it, the first one, workforce planning. Very interesting topic. I've been a part of many workforce planning conversations in my career. Some great and some not so great. So when I actually step back and think about workforce planning, more holistically, what I thought I'd share with the group today is how I like to approach workforce planning with my clients. The first thing is really gathering your inputs. And that does involve a little bit of pre-work. I know sometimes with these conversations, it's very easy to collaborate and get into a room or have a Zoom call, whatever it may be, and just talk about your workforce and what you're trying to achieve and what skills you need. But really it's about getting inputs up front. And these things that we need to consider include the long-term vision and also the strategic objectives of an organisation. Or if you're not in an organisational lens, just thinking about your team or your department, more generally, and what you need to contribute to the business. Then layering that with what immediate requirements, commitments and deliverables you have. Thinking about your customer base and your clients and what do they expect from you. If you've got shareholders, be it you're a listed organisation or you have private equity involved, what do they expect from the business? More so than ever, thinking about community expectations as well. There's many articles out there suggesting that people are trusting corporations now more than governments in our modern society. And that puts a lot of that puts the community at the heart of what a lot of organisations do, and it's important to consider their interests. And then any other stakeholder expectations you may have, and coming back to that, if you're a leader of a department, well, what are your internal stakeholders maybe expecting from you? Overlaying that with any economic and industry forecasts you may have, and then also bringing to the table what does your current organisational structure look like, and having a pretty good grip on what your current capability is in the business. So bringing that into the discussion, you get into the consideration phase, and that is really tough because you need to start prioritising short-term deliverables versus your long-term objectives. And that's not an easy process to do, but the most important thing with this is to make sure you're having open dialogue and you're allowing the space for people to put their views on the table. It's also really clear, and in some ways, you need to be a little bit ruthless in really understanding around what's required activity and what's discretionary activity in your workforce. Sometimes those things that are discretionary, they may be more fun, they may be more interesting, but do they actually help with you achieving your short-term deliverables? And do they actually contribute to your long-term objectives? There's also financial drivers that you need to bring to the table as well, and understanding what your capacity is to invest in your workforce. And then it's around sitting back and thinking about what capability do you require to deliver your immediate and your long-term requirements. So from these discussions, hopefully what you start to get is some outcomes. And this is all about actually forecasting a structure and thinking about what roles and responsibilities you need in your organisation. Now, you'll see I've got a very loose time frame there on a people budget between 6 and 24 months. That's because it depends on the nature of your industry, the volatility that your business is exposed to. There's no point actually forecasting something out 24 months in immense detail if you know that your business is going to look significantly different in 12 months' time and you actually don't know what that's going to look like. And then hopefully falling out of everything that you've discussed is that you're going to be able to actually know what capabilities you've got today and what you need for the future. So a capability gap analysis. So where do we go from here? This is the execution piece, in the bottom of the black box. And that starts thinking about how do we go about this? How do we go about filling those gaps? Do we build internally? So do we develop and provide an opportunity for employees? Do we actually buy? So do we actually go out there and attract and hire talent to fill gaps? And it would be remiss of me to say that Morgan McKinley can of course help you, with those types of challenges that you may have. Do you partner? So do you actually look at external firms with the expertise and the capability you have to partner with you, through that period, be it advertising, be it marketing, if it's around getting your brand out there, or even, what we're talking about today, engaging a HR advisory firm to help with certain things that are going on in your workforce. Or more holistically, do you start thinking about reorganisation and what changes you need to make to your organisation structurally and to the roles and responsibilities to actually allow you to hit those short and long-term goals. We'll talk a little bit about those considerations, if you recall, later on in the WebEx. So we'll park workforce planning. Remember, if you've got any questions on this particular topic, you can flick that through. You can flick that through to Dom, and he'll start collating those for us to talk about at the end of today's session. The next topic of this webinar is around talent management. It's a term we hear a lot about in organisations. But what I thought I would do today is to split talent management into two areas. One is around roles that are critical to your business, and how do you actually go about managing people in those positions, retaining them, and we'll talk a little bit more of that in a second. And then once we've tackled that, is how do we think about people with high potential in their role? And how do we actually go about engaging and managing those individuals? So we come back to critical roles. One of the things with talent management, in my career, is that often the individual is the focus of identifying talent in a business. But an interesting exercise that personally I think is very valuable is to actually shift the focus away from the individual and actually onto the role, or the roles in your business that are critical. If you can actually gain clarity on what roles are critical in your organisation, it actually helps you as leaders and HR practitioners to help you prioritise management action around those roles. And that may be either how do you retain the individuals in those roles because of their skill sets and their contribution to the business, but also thinking about how do you actually strategically reduce the criticality of that role in your organisation. The next thing is always, well, how do I assess what roles are critical? Often people will approach this with a bit of a gut feel mentality. But what I really encourage people to do when having talent management conversations and thinking about roles is just take a step back and think about the role's impact on the customer, the role's impact on your revenue line, back to the community, what impact does that role have on your reputation, and thinking more broadly around risk management, especially for those people that are working in the financial services sector, which is obviously where I've most recently worked. What roles, what impact do those roles play from a risk management perspective? So when actually looking at this and looking at the roles across your organisation, leaders will often think all roles are critical, and I've had that many times in my career where I feel I can't possibly lose anyone in my team, and that's often true because we value the contributions of people in our organisation. But it's really, really, really important to get clarity on what roles are most important to a business. So then that's all well and good to know what roles may be critical, or what roles are critical, but it's then shifting the dialogue and actually then thinking about, well, how do we actually do something about it? And I almost think about this in breaking it down into two sections: the short term and the long term. So the first one is around retaining individuals, retaining those individuals that sit in those roles. Now, the reality is on retention is that often there's only a certain lifeline on it, and it can't be the only thing that you focus on. But essentially, an individual's aspirations and also their engagement in the business are going to impact whether or not they stay in your organisation or not, and also the availability of external opportunities out there in the market, the money that's been offered for those roles, and also the propensity for those individuals to leave are going to impact their retention. So what's really important is understanding these factors and understanding what drives each individual, because as we all know, everybody on this webinar, we're all different, and different things we value more than others. So what I encourage leaders out there to do, and also people that are working as HR professionals on this webinar, is to really work with leaders through a HR practitioner, and for those leaders in the room, is really to start having multiple conversations to stay connected with your teams, so you can understand what's important to them, you can understand what opportunities they're actually looking for, so you can start to create some meaningful retention plans, for your people. When we get to the high potential slide, I'm going to talk about what types of meaningful things you can actually employ to retain people. So that's really much in the short term. The second part of this is actually thinking about the long-term impacts. Like I said, at some point in time, most employees are going to move on from your organisation. And if you're just focused on the short term to reduce the criticality of the role and reducing the attrition risk associated to an individual, it's actually not going to help you for the long term. So it's really important to actually sit back and think about why a role is actually critical to your organisation. Is it because of the unique skills that are required to perform that role? Is it because it's a unique role within your organisation? Have you put two functional areas together, like an IT professional doing an IT role combined with operational responsibility, which may be hard for you to find in the external market. And then it's actually sitting back and thinking about, well, how do I actually start to address these things? So one, if it is because of lack of internal succession for a particular role, how do you start to build a talent pipeline within your organisation? And if we think about the slide before, do you start building that capability internally? Do you think about how you buy that capability and bring that capability into your business? Do you think about how you make slight shifts in roles and responsibilities so you can actually de-risk your business? Secondly, points of failure is often something that pops up on why a role is actually critical. And what I mean by this is there potentially a lack of knowledge sharing by the person that holds the role. Is there potentially a lack of process or procedures or systemization, can't even get the word out, of what that role does? Is it because of a systems issue? Has technology not been deployed to actually automate part of a function? So it's actually then sitting back and thinking about what ways can we actually reduce the criticality of the role by putting systems in place, by sharing knowledge, and by reducing that single point of failure that may be attributed to a position. And then a third one, which is a little bit more difficult to deal with, but sometimes there's just a limited supply of external talent for particular positions. And we've all got those positions where we know it's extremely hard to replace. Now, if you've got roles that are highly critical and then you know that they're actually really hard to replace externally, one of the more common approaches, or when I say common, it's known but not often deployed, is thinking more about talent mapping in the market and actually connecting with people early, sharing information about your organisation and what potential opportunities may be there for them. So when they apply for a role or when you have an availability, you can actually reduce your lead time to attract people. Again, that is something that Dom and the team can talk to you about. Shifting gears now to sort of high potential talent. So we've touched base here on the critical roles, but now let's think about those people that have got a lot of potential that are actually going to be able to help you, grow your business or achieve more in your department. So we've probably seen a lot of this before, as leaders, but those high potential talent are those that have the capability, but also the aspiration to grow into larger roles. One thing that I think is really important is that a larger role doesn't have to be at the next level. It can also include a broader remit in their current role. Because what's important is that not all people are seeking a leadership career. Not everybody is seeking to be a general manager, a director, a vice president, whatever the title is in your particular organisation. Some people actually want to actually grow out their roles with broader technical responsibility, or technical, in some ways, technical leadership as well. So it's really important to differentiate between what people are seeking in their career, so you can actually match, what you do for that individual, to make sure it aligns to what their motivations are. And then overlaying all this when thinking about high potentials, and if you are going to invest in them, it's sitting back and just testing and making sure that they're aligned to what your company purpose is and what your vision is. Hypothetically, if you're working in a medium-sized financial services organisation or technology organisation, but they're not aligned to the purpose of your business and they're actually looking to maybe go completely the other way into a non-for-profit business, is that someone that you want to be investing significantly in? Then also thinking about their values alignment to your business and whether or not they display the expected behaviours that you expect from your people in the workforce. Often high potentials can be the hardest to retain. And they're after accelerated development. So if we're moving into the middle of the slide now, the difference between high potential employees and people that may not have as much potential is that they're often driven to succeed and will actually engage in self-directed development. The other thing with high potentials is that they might be better at networking. They become more known in your marketplace, and that's often recognised by the external market, meaning that if they've got a propensity to leave your business, that there may be more offers coming on the table for them. So again, coming back to what we spoke about in relation to critical talent, it's really important to make sure that we understand the motivators and the aspirations of these individuals. And unfortunately, it can't just be one conversation. It can't be a conversation, and I've seen it before, where the person goes and has a coffee with their manager, and the first question they ask is, okay, what are you looking for in the next 12 months? Or where do you see your career going in the next 2 years? That's a very transactional conversation. And you're not going to get to the heart of the matter. You're not going to get the truth out of the employee immediately, or rarely, I should say. You may be able to do that. But it's really about continuous conversations, staying connected with your people, so you really do truly understand what they're aspiring to. Then when you actually truly know this, you can start to create internal opportunity for this accelerated development, which may prevent them from going to another organisation. So some of these examples, and these can also be thought about with your critical talent, include exposure to executive leaders, opportunities to run projects or work in projects, broader opportunities to lead, and that may not just be within their area. If they're a technology professional, it might be able to be providing leadership outside of technology and to the business. As spoken about before, it might just be expanding their remit a little bit further to give them broader responsibility. Assigning them an external mentor to help coach and guide them through specific development actions they want. Maybe enlisting them as a mentor themselves if that's something that they're passionate about developing people through the organisation. External representation of the organisation could also be something that people are seeking. Then thinking about board exposure, appointments to committees or sub-boards that you may have in your business, to really let them know how critical they are to the organisation. Supporting further education, and even comments into different businesses to give them broader opportunities. So that's a little bit about on talent management. I think the key takeaway here is thinking about critical roles as one part of your talent management approach, and how you actually mitigate the criticality of those roles for the long term, also retaining people in those roles in the short term, and then thinking about your high potentials. How do you stay connected to them, and how do you create meaningful experiences for them, so they don't think about leaving your organisation. So the next one, and this is where a lot of my conversations have been over the last few months, is how to actually manage organisational change, not from not from implementing new systems or new processes, more so if there's actually a requirement to make people change. So whilst everyone's situation is going to be different, and this can't be construed as legal advice, what I thought I would do is to share a couple of the key things I've been talking to clients about at the moment. The first one is obviously around redundancy, and when is a role redundant? And I use that word role intentionally, because a lot of people will say a person is redundant. And it's really important to make sure that it's not about making people redundant, it's about making roles redundant. If there is no longer a requirement for the role, or the position itself has significantly changed. So the starting point for any redundancy is actually the role. I've listed a couple of reasons there on why a role may be redundant, such as company earnings, new technology coming into play, changes to process, changes to strategy, relocating the role, from Sydney to Melbourne or Brisbane to Adelaide, changing customer requirements. Maybe the products and services that you're offering to your customers have shifted considerably and you don't need certain skill sets in your organisation, and obviously closure of business. I'll come back to why where the link is to the person as we move through the session in relation to redundancy. The next thing that's really important, and it's something that a lot of small and medium-sized businesses aren't always aware of, and that is that there is actually a requirement to consult with impacted employees about your preliminary decision, and again, it's a deliberate word, your preliminary decision to make a role redundant. What needs to happen in a consultation process is that you speak to those impacted employees, you talk to them about what the potential changes and impacts are, you talk to them about any steps that you've taken to minimise the impact on the individual or on the business, and you also provide them the opportunity to put forward ideas and suggestions. What isn't classified as consultation is having a conversation, asking if people have ideas or suggestions. Then if they don't at that point in time, moving forward with the redundancy of the role and potentially meaning that the employee leaves the business, it's about providing the employee or employees time and the opportunity to go away and think about what's been said to them. Also, when consulting, it's important to make sure that there is some type of formal correspondence to the employee so they understand what those changes are. The next thing is, after a consultation process, if it is determined that the role is to be made redundant, one of the other things that needs to happen is that you need to make sure that you can demonstrate that you've looked for suitable alternative roles before ending the employee's employment for the reason of redundancy. Often this is a step that's missed, and it's something that is looked at unfavourably by the Fair Work Commission if an organisation hasn't genuinely looked for suitable alternate roles for individuals if their role is made redundant. There is a couple of things to think about, but really importantly, if you take away from this, is that roles are redundant, not people. You are required to consult with individuals in relation to a preliminary decision around the redundancy of a role. If a role is made redundant, it's important that you are looking for redeployment opportunities. In the next couple of slides, we'll also talk about how you can work with people as they leave your organisation. So how they, for them to leave with a really good sense of your business and for them to be almost an advocate for you out there in the future. The next one that's come up in the marketplace, and probably no surprise, is around stand down provisions and changes to work schedules. So firstly on stand down, if a business is going to stand employees down, it needs to be for a reason which they cannot be held responsible for, and it isn't because of an economic downturn. So during the coronavirus, you would see more reports like a Qantas or a Virgin standing employees down, and that's because they aren't responsible for what has happened. And for those industries, as an example, it is due to government direction, which is a reason why employees can invoke a stand down reason. Under COVID-19, it can also be due to a lack of supply for a particular business, or if someone's actually been successful in their application for the JobKeeper funding. So there are a couple of reasons on why organisations can stand people down. But again, when standing people down, there is still a requirement to consult with employees before making the decision. Also, on the other side, what a lot of my clients have been doing is making changes to their work schedules. Not so much reducing salaries directly, but making changes to their work schedules. And again, clients have been consulting, as required, with their people about reducing their hours. And what's been interesting is that I've seen some really good outcomes come from these conversations. Examples include, an accounting firm that reduced their people down to 30 hours a week, so 4 days a week. But through the consultation process, instead of it being employees working 4 days a week, they simply reduced their hours and worked together to have coverage across each of the days. So employees were still working a 5-day week, but doing reduced hours. And that was something that came about through the consultation process. There's also been other situations where clients have spoken to their teams about the proposed changes, and some employees have come back requesting to work less during this period so they can spend more time with their family. So this is just a couple of little examples, talking you through, why consultation is important, is because you can actually start to get really good outcomes that work for the business and for your people. If there is a proposal to reduce salaries without reducing working hours, this is something that employees will need to agree to. And the little caveat I say here, and before COVID-19, if you think about what was in the press around employment relations, it was a lot around underpayments and making sure that annualised salaries were covering the relevant overtime people were working. So if you're in a situation where you or your business have already reduced salaries without reducing hours, or are thinking about doing this as we move further along into this period of COVID-19, just be really mindful of what awards you covered by, what the minimum salaries are for the particular levels, and any annualised salary requirements you have, especially if you're in an industry where your people work, discretionary overtime. As I said before, I wanted to touch on today the importance of how people feel when they exit your business. It probably is common sense that how they feel, especially if a role has been made redundant and they have been consequently asked to leave, how you go about that will actually impact how they feel and also feel about the business more broadly. These perceptions impact your employment brand and also the views others hold about your business out there in the external environment. The other interesting thing that people can often forget is that people on the sidelines that aren't impacted by the changes in your business are watching how the organisation is treating people when they leave, and how, when people leave, how they feel about the organisation. And their observations and perceptions ultimately impact their engagement in your organisation, and also their likelihood to stay in the business. So these are just a couple of tips. There's lots more, but these are just some things that I've often thought about. When people have actually, or groups of people have left an organisation, and we'll use the example because their role was redundant. The first one is thinking about how you communicate these messages. If we think about Brian Chesky from Airbnb, perfect example around transparency, around how the decision was made, how they wanted to make sure that the decision was made in alignment with their values when they were removing 1,900 people from their global workforce, and that they were really looking to do everything possible for their impacted employees. Remarkably, even though 25% of the organisation left or is leaving Airbnb, they received positive press about the way that they handled this situation. Now, I'm not going to say that we're all going to get positive press out of such a dreadful occurrence, but it's just a reminder that there is a right way to go about things, and how you communicate the reasons behind a change is really important. The next component of it, which I always like to think about, is employee control. So what control can you give the employee in the messaging process? When does the messaging go out to allow the employee to actually get to grips with the result of their role becoming redundant after the consultation period? If it's only a once-off occurrence, does it need to be listed to the business as a redundancy? Can it be communicated in company announcements as a resignation? There are just a couple of things to think about, but what control can you give back to the employee? Because ultimately, giving someone control over a situation, I think, as we would all know, is very good for one's well-being. The next piece is around notice periods. Do people need to work through their notice periods? Are you able to provide them the option on whether or not that they work, or they can use that time, to start looking for a new role, spend time with their family or friends, collect their thoughts? The other one is walking employees. We hear those horror stories, and we've all come across people that we know that have been informed that their role is redundant. They pack the box and they leave the business. And the people that I've spoken to about that in my network, who it's happened to, none of them have felt that it was a pleasant experience. So it's always one of those questions that I ask, is do you really need to walk an employee? Do they really possess a huge risk to your organisation or the people in your organisation? I'm not saying in all situations you shouldn't be walking employees, but I think it's something that you should only reserve the right to do if it is absolutely necessary. Also, little things like IT access impact how people feel about the business, especially when people have worked in an organisation for so long. It's not uncommon for people to have personal files on their computer. If people have on IT equipment, if people actually have a mobile number that they've used both for work and personal use, are you able to transfer that over to the individual so they're not having to re-establish their mobile number? They're just little things to think about. But on the IT access point, not shutting off IT access, even if you are asking people to leave your organisation with immediate effect, and providing them the opportunity to actually gather their personal files, is something that can make a big difference. I'm not suggesting that you just provide them open slather to what that, to the IT platform, but it could be as simply as actually having them sit down with someone to collect files and information. In some situations, people might be working through their notice period, and it could also be an extended notice period. It is a bit of a handover process that both the organisation and the employee have agreed to through the consultation process. But really thinking about what flexibility you can give people around running their job search. Can they attend interviews? Can they, do you mind if they, jump into a room and search LinkedIn and search Seek and start building out their networks, when they've got the opportunity to do that? The other part of it is also whether or not you consider career transition services for an individual. So do you give them a coach that can help them from resume preparation, understanding what industries or roles that they should be going to, helping them prepare for interviews, all the way through to actually helping them with the salary negotiation piece? Is that a service which you can provide your employees that can really help how they feel about your organisation when leaving? Another point is around counselling. Some people take these decisions to heart, and it can lead, it can lead to other complications such as depression or anxiety or stress. What services do you have in place as an organisation that can help people with this, such as an employee assistance program? Or if you actually don't have a formal program around counselling services, is there anything that you can put in place for situations when people are losing their roles for the reason of redundancy? And finally, I know it's only a little one, but it means a lot to a lot of people. It's thinking about their farewell. How do you say goodbye to them? And again, what control can you give that person? Is it coffee? Is it a morning tea? Is it a couple of drinks after work to say thank you? For different people, it's going to mean different things. Some people won't want a big farewell, but actually giving people a little bit of control on what that may look like. All in all, considering these nine things will hopefully improve how people feel when they leave your organisation. In turn, hopefully improving the perception of your business and your employment brand, making it easier for you to attract talent in the future, and hopefully allowing you to retain or improve the stickiness of people that work within your organisation. So shifting gears, and as I mentioned before, on leading in the current environment, I wanted to talk about leading a remote workforce. When thinking about this, I think about it in 4 relatively simple categories. Be outcome focused, stay connected, encourage work-life integration, and getting to the heart of it and understanding individual motivational drivers of people. The first one, about being outcome focused, the current environment is actually presenting businesses an opportunity to trust employees to deliver based on outcomes, not time spent at their desk. The challenge is that people need to become comfortable with people working staggered hours throughout the day to allow them to stay fresh, stay focused. I know this is a little bit unconventional, but what it does do is it removes what I like to call justification anxiety. And that is people feeling they have to justify that they're at their desk between 8:30 and 5, and they're taking their 1 hour or 50-minute lunch break through the day. The other thing in relation to being outcome focused is that this is the time to actually work with your teams to prioritize key outcomes and really agree on how you're going to deliver those outcomes. So shifting it from managing by when people are present and what times they're present, through to what outcomes they're delivering. The second one is around staying connected. I think, as we all know, and if we're going through this, for some people working remotely is great. They thrive on it, they enjoy it, but for others it's a little bit harder. So how can you engage your team to actually think about a rhythm that can enhance collaboration, idea generation, and how to keep people emotionally connected in their work? And like I said, this is a time where even if we've got great ideas on how to do this, it's how do you bring your team together to work through what that rhythm looks like. And over this period, talking to people that work as part of teams or who are leaders, a lot of them have missed this conversation. And the positive thing is that it's never too late. Actually, how you actually get your group together to work through this. The other interesting point is around personal and social connection and how technology can support you in doing this. Now, it's not important for everybody, but it is for some. And it is important to understand how you can make that happen. I know many of you have probably had Friday night drinks via Zoom, but there are other ways to make this happen, such as sharing the morning coffee, having a team lunch together, celebrating successes around excellent things people have been doing, over the week, so on and so forth. The next one is around work-life integration. It links into getting comfortable with people working staggered hours, but it's actually increasing in prevalence. More and more people are doing this. And to give your people the confidence to do that and remove that justification anxiety I spoke about, if you're outcome focused, it provides people the confidence to focus on what they need to be delivering, not when they need to be delivering it. Obviously, you'll have deadlines, of course. The other interesting thing around work-life integration is that leaders need to role model behaviours. If you have an organisation which is sending messages that work-life integration is what we want our people to be doing, working between 7 and 10 in the morning, taking a couple of hours off, late morning, logging back in after lunch, picking the children up from school, and then logging back in at night to finish off your working day. If that's messaging's coming from the business, that's what we're about, but then you have leaders that either A, don't role model it, or B, don't support it, you can get a disconnect, in your organisation. And again, from talking to friends who are not leaders, who are working in roles and are stuck in this position, they're at odds against what their organisation is saying compared to actually how they're feeling within their day-to-day work. And one particular conversation I had was actually asking an individual, has your manager sat down and explained that it's okay to do this? And the short answer was no. The second question I asked is that if they actually had that conversation with you, how would it make you feel? And they replied quite simply that it would give them the confidence to actually integrate their work and personal lives. The last point here is around really understanding individual drivers, because unfortunately with leadership, as we know, there isn't a one-size-fits-all to leading any individual. And working in a remote environment, it's really important to connect with people and understand what is driving them. As I mentioned before, some people are driven by relationships in the workforce. I don't want you to confuse that with working with others. Sometimes it's really around the social connection. For those individuals that it's really important to, how do you make that live? How do you make that real for them? On the flip side, others are more motivated by working together, collaborating, sharing ideas, the whiteboard session, workshopping things. Again, in a remote work environment, that does make it a little bit more difficult, but with the technology we have available today, how can you create those environments for those individuals to continue to thrive continue to be able to thrive in how they work and collaborating with others. The next point's around leadership. And when I talk about leadership, it's that some individuals are motivated by not just connection with you as their leader, but they're also driven and motivated by getting exposure to other leaders across an organisation. That's a little bit harder again in a remote setting because there isn't that crossover in the hallway. There isn't the coffee in the internal cafe if you're in an organisation that has internal cafe facilities. How do you think about those people that love connection with leaders, and how do you continue to provide them that access during this period? We've already spoke about work-life integration. For some people, it is more important for them than others, and it's really important that you understand, where it sits on their spectrum, because there are many people that love working between 8 and 6 p.m, doing their big 10-hour day, contributing to the business, and then outside of those times, they know it's their time. Then sense of accomplishment. Thinking about those people in your team that really are driven by achieving really great outcomes, by being recognised for those outcomes, and how do you still make sure that they actually feel that sense of accomplishment in their work? How do they get that recognition? How do they get that challenging work? How do they get that exposure to actually fulfill that need for a sense of accomplishment? And then finally, recognition. The thank yous. We all know some employees appreciate a thank you more than others. Be it private recognition or public recognition, really thinking about how you facilitate the needs for those individuals that love recognition for the work that they do, and how do you deliver that appropriately. And our last topic for today's webinar is really thinking about employee wellbeing. So coming out of COVID, just a couple of categories, I guess, how I like to think about wellbeing. So you can really start tailoring an experience which is right for your organisation, more than just mental or physical health. Now, obviously, health is one of these pillars. How do we actually care for the mental and physical health of our team? How do we raise awareness around certain things, certain health topics that may be impacting people in our organisation and the relevant demographic you may have in your firm? How do you provide access to these services or point people in a direction on how they actually get support? Not necessarily the business funding, but how do you actually support and facilitate that interaction? I've mentioned understanding focus areas, and again, that's just really around understanding your demographic and what's important to your people. And secondly, around leader education. How can you invest in your leaders so they've actually got a better understanding around mental health, specifically. Now, how can they spot out, not be a counsellor, but how can they actually be able to identify if someone is stressed, is displaying anxiety or depression? The next point around wellbeing is life. And again, we've spoken about it today, work-life integration, and for leaders to lead via actions. If it's something that your business is working towards, it's how do you reinforce those positive examples? And finally, thinking about how you consider other leave options to provide people flexibility, be it purchasing annual leave through the year, be it allowing people to take unpaid leave through the year. Really thinking about how people can take leave, how they can work remotely to integrate their work and life. The next one's around your work environment. So again, your culture and values are a huge part about how people feel in the workforce. Creating a safe work environment so people don't, A, get injured physically, or B, are subject to any types of bullying, discrimination or harassment. Making sure that you've got the right ergonomic setups, thinking about those end of trip facilities that you have for your people so they can ride their bike to and from work, have a shower, etc. And then really thinking about the technology that you've got in play to facilitate, remote working. Again, if work-life integration is important, having the right technology to facilitate that really can have an impact on one's well-being. For some people, well-being and having a state of well-being is how they contribute to the community. So how does your organisation get involved in the community? Do you allow your people volunteer leave to be able to give back? And also, how do you think about community expectations and sustainability of your business? And then finally, thinking about financial well-being as well, around what education can be provided to individuals. What processes do you have in place for reviewing your superannuation? Not products, but your sort of, your default fund that you have for your people. Is there an opportunity for you to consider what types of insurances that you may pay for employees in relation to salary continuance insurances or total permanent disability insurances? And then if you've got people on the other end of the spectrum and are looking to retire, is there anything organisations can do in that retirement planning phase? So again, thinking about employee wellbeing, the message from this is that as we're coming out of COVID-19, it's to think about this more broadly, not just necessarily around the health of your workforce. So Dom, I think this sort of wraps up the last slide of the formal content, and we said we'd have 5 minutes for questions, which I think we're bang on time for.
Yep. Thank you, Phil, and thank you for your insights. Much appreciated. I've already had a few people chatting to say they have come away with some practical tips and information there. So a couple of questions that have come through. How can an organisation reduce the criticality of a role when a current employee is not sharing that knowledge? And that obviously even more important when everything is via Zoom or video chat.
Yeah, well, thanks for whoever asked that question. It's hard. Is probably the first side of it. There is no doubt it is one of the most difficult things to do when you've got someone that's really critical to the business, really good at what they do, but part of their DNA is actually holding on to that organisation, holding on to that knowledge. Sometimes it could be a potential control thing. For whatever this particular example is, I don't know the dynamics, so I can't advise on that. But I think the first step is actually to sit down with the individual and engage them in a conversation around why their role's critical to the organisation. Because sometimes people don't know. That's the first step. They just don't know. So sitting down, having a conversation with them around why the role's critical. Is that because of lack of internal talent? Is it because of knowledge sharing, whatever it may be? Obviously knowledge sharing in this one's going to be one of them. But then actually, once they know the why, then partnering with that employee on solutions to making it less critical. So instead of telling the employee what they need to do, it's understanding, it's allowing them to know why the role's critical, and then partnering with them to reduce that criticality so they're part of the a solution.
And there's been a couple of questions come around this, might be into two parts, but really addressing how an organisation addresses an employee who isn't delivering whilst working remotely. Someone's taken that a step further and asked, how do you actually make someone redundant via a Zoom chat? But maybe if we address the performance piece to understand how you'd go about doing that on a remote basis.
Yeah, okay. I think that, when people are working remotely, and again, not knowing what the particular performance issue is, but if we just run the angle where, in my experience, it's when people don't feel, or leaders don't feel, that the employee is meeting their core requirements of their role. So at the end of the day, we're all employed to meet core requirements, and our contract may say we need to work 37.5 hours a week. And if it's, the heart of the matter is that we don't feel that the employee is meeting those minimum requirements, I always encourage, at the first conversation, with the person around this particular issue, is sitting down with the individual and just having a conversation with them about what the perceptions are from you as a leader who's asked a particular question, but also in this situation, there may also be perceptions of others in the team. So again, it's just having a conversation around what the perceptions are at this particular point in time, seeking their feedback, because in these situations, there may be things going on in someone's life that we just don't know about. So it can also be an opportunity to engage the employee and have a really open conversation with them around what their, what other things are actually maybe impacting, their performance. And then from that, coming out of that conversation with either, one, it is, if there are things that have popped up in the conversation, what can you do together to actually help the employee? I've had situations in the past where people have reduced hours. So I either gone from 5 to 4 days or 4 to 3 to help them manage external things. But if it is just a general performance matter, have that initial conversation with them. Be really clear on what your expectations are. Do that in a really collaborative way as a first step, and revisit it. So don't have the conversation and then let things go on for another 4 to 6 weeks and not revisit it. Have frequent feedback. So if you've noticed change, let the employee know. If you're not noticing change, let the employee know. And then if we get to a point, then it may resolve some type of more formal action, which obviously, if you're internal, you might have an internal HR team that may be able to help you, or secondary, of course, as part of our business model here at Partale, is to help people through those situations.
Right. Thank you. Just time for one more question. The questions are actually coming in thick and fast. So obviously people have got quite a few challenges that are happening in the businesses out there. But last one, we've got a couple of minutes before we wrap up. So just to help with workforce planning, are there any models which can assist a business in prioritizing short-term deliverables?
Yeah, there probably is. Although not probably, there is. Oh, you stumped me. Probably a really simple model to use, and it's a really good tool to use actually if you're just having if you're having a conversation with a leadership team or your leadership team, and it's really just to dissect things that you're doing into sort of 4 quadrants. So, what work is important and urgent. Obviously, that's stuff that needs to be done. What types of things are important but they're not urgent, so they don't have a deliverable that's due today? What type of work are you doing though, which it's not important at all, but it is actually urgent? So to start challenging, is that just, the work which is discretionary that we spoke about earlier on in the session? And then the 4th quadrant is thinking about, work which is, it's actually the opposite of all that. So it is not important and it is not urgent. So it's just a really simple tool, but at least then it allows you to start mapping out the work that you're doing. And if anything, it can be a really good baseline to guide your conversation.
Right. Thank you. And look, to those people that have posed questions, we haven't had time to, I know Phil is more than happy, if you'd like to reach out to him personally, his contact details are on this final slide, or you can reach out to any of your Morgan McKinley consultants as well. We're happy to put you in touch with Phil or answer questions where we can. Phil, again, thank you for taking the time to present today. And I know everyone's from home, and the backdrops are a bit more personal than they have been in the past, but appreciate you taking the time, and very insightful, very useful, and I'm sure you'll have a few direct questions by the looks of things as well.
Yep, perfect. All right, thank you for joining, everyone. It's been a great session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.